Tov. Today's Daf Yomi is dedicated for Yeshua. That's all for all of Am Yisrael. We're going to start on the bottom of Kiddushin Ayin Daled on the base, 4 lines from the bottom. The Daf Yomi for today is Daf Ayin Hey, as we're now less than a week away from finishing this beautiful Masechta and all of Seder Nashim. So the Daf Yomi tells us, Tana Rabbanan, Ben Teisha Shana V'Yom Echad. Let's say you have a boy who's 9 years old, and so that's the age where we think that their bia is considered to be a valid bia. They're capable of having bia. So Ben Teishan of Yom Echad, if he's a ger, Ammoni, Moavi, Mitri, Vadom, Kusi, Vinasim, Chal, Mamzer. So any of these people are not allowed to marry into the Jewish people, the Ammonite, the Moabite, the Mitri, the Adomi, the Kusi, the Nas and the Chal, Mamzer, and they had relations with the Kohenes, Shaboa Kohenes, Valavia, with a woman who's the daughter of a Kohen or a Levi, Valbas Yisrael, or a regular Jewish woman, Paslua. They disqualify her from, if she was a Kohenes, from eating from the Truma, and also from marrying a Kohen. So that's the halacha. Rabbi Yossi says, Habs were on 74b, 2 lines from the bottom, Poker Tov. Rabbi Yossi says, Kol Shazaro Pasul Posel. Rabbi Yossi says, he says it a little differently, and the Gemara is going to try and figure out what the difference is. Rabbi Yossi says, anyone whose seed is disqualified, he is going to be pasul, posel. Meaning to say, anyone whose seed is disqualified will disqualify from the kahuna. Will disqualify, anyone whose seed is disqualified from the kahuna will also disqualify a woman from the kahuna. Gemara is going to ask, what's the distinction between Rabbi Yossi and the Tanakama? But then he says, Kol she'ein zaro pasul eno pasul. Anyone whose seed is not disqualified from the kuna, he does not disqualify. Third opinion. Shon Gamliel says, Kol, the top of 75a, Kol shatanose bito atanose amanuso. He says, anyone who you marry, you can marry his daughter, meaning to say it's a Kohen. Anyone who shatanose bito, anyone who you can marry his daughter, atanose amanuso, he can marry his widow. The call sha iatanose bito, and anyone where you can't marry his daughter, iatanose amanuso. So that's Rabbi Shimon Gamliel's position. Anyone where you don't marry his daughter, you can't marry his widow. So the Gemara is going to say we have 3 opinions here. How do we understand the distinctions between each opinion? Ma'ika ben Tanakam ben Rabbi Yossi. So we're on top of 75a, 3 lines on the top. What's the distinction between the Tanakama and Rabbi Yossi? Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yochanan says, Mitri Sheni Ika Benayo. The distinction between them is a Mitri, an Egyptian, who's in the 2nd generation. We know that a 3rd generation Mitri is allowed to marry, a 3rd generation convert from the Egyptians can marry into the Jewish people, but a 2nd generation can't. So that's the distinction between Tanakam and Rabbi Yossi, meaning to say that he himself is disqualified, but he does not disqualify others. And both of them derive it. So let's just say Mitzri Sheni Ikabeneo. We'll look at the Rashi. According to the Tanakama, any Egyptian is prohibited to come to the community, and even his 2nd generation. However, the 3rd generation is not called a Mitzri. He's a regular Jew. So that's the distinction between them. And they both learn it out from the Kohen Gadol and a widow. The Tanakama Savar, the Tanakama's other position, remember, Kol Shepasul Posel. The Tanakama says, whoever is disqualified will disqualify others. Tanakama learns it out from a Kohen Gadol to a widow. Tanakama Savar Ki Kohen Gadol Ba'amana, just like Kohen Gadol to a widow. Ma Kohen Gadol Ba'amana Shabia Soba Vera, just like the Kohen Gadol to a widow. His bia with her is sinful, uposel ba, and also he disqualifies her. Afkol should be also bavera posel. Anyone whose bia is a sin will disqualify him. So too, Egyptian, a 2nd generation Egyptian, so with a woman will disqualify her. Whereas Rabbi Yossi Savar, no, ki kohen gadol ba'alman, it's like kohen gadol to a widow. Not kohen gadol ba'alman, no, just like a kohen gadol to a widow, shazaro pasul uposel, just like kohen gadol to a widow, whose seed is disqualifying, and whose seed is shezaro pasul, that just like a Kohen Gadol to a widow, where we're going to say that his seed is pasul, and also it will be posel. So therefore, we're going to say that the seed from it is pasul, and also he disqualifies the widow. Av kol shezaro pasul. So to anyone whose seed will be pasul to the kuna, will be posel, will disqualify the widow to the kuna. Fuke comes to exclude, says Rabbi Yossi, comes to exclude the Mitri Sheni, the second generation Egyptian, She'ein Zaro Pasul, because his seed is not Pasul. Tamar Kra, because it says, Banim Asher Yivaldu Em, Dor Shlishi, Yavo Em Bekal Hashem. So the third generation Egyptian is okay. And so therefore, if the second generation Egyptian is with a Jewish woman, he doesn't disqualify her. Rashbag says, Kol Shatas Nosei Bito, Atanose Amanuso. Anyone, you can marry his daughter, you can marry his widow. So the Gemara says, what's the distinction between Rashbag and Rabbi Yossi? Ma'ika ben Rabbi Yossi or Rashbag? Gemara says, so the distinction between them is by a convert from the Ammonites to the Moabites, where we know that the convert from the Ammonites and the Moabites, they can never marry in, but their daughters can. So that's the distinction. Again, Rabbi Yossi and Rashbag, the distinction between them is derived from the comparison of a widow to a Kohen Gadol. Rabbi Yossi savar ki Kohen Gadol ba'almana. Rabbi Yossi says it's like a Kohen Gadol to a widow. Ma Kohen Gadol ba'almana, just like a Kohen Gadol to a widow. Shezaro pasul uposel, just like a Kohen Gadol to a widow, whose seed is disqualified. And he also disqualifies the widow. So to anyone whose seed is disqualified, will disqualify. Rashbag says, Kohen Gadol ba'almana. Rashbag says, no, it's like a Kohen Gadol to a widow. Not Kohen Gadol ba'almana shekol zaro pasul, just like Kohen Gadol to a widow, where we're going to say under those circumstances, we're going to say shekol zaro pasul, meaning to say that just like Kohen Gadol to a widow, that not only is the male disqualified, but also the females will be disqualified to marry a Kohen. So to anyone whose shekol zaro pasul, it refers to a case, where do we say that they disqualify the woman that they're with? Only if all the offspring is pasul. Afilu nekevos, even females. Lafuke comes to exclude the case of the Ger, Ammoni, and Moabi, comes to exclude the case of the convert from the Ammonites and Moabites. Then the Kevos have a ksheris l'bavakal, because the female Ammonites and Moabites, most famous one of all is Ruth, that they are kosher to come into the community. The Amar Mar Ammoni v'lo Ammonis, Moabi v'lo Moabis. Only a male Ammonite cannot marry in, not a female, and only a male Moabite cannot marry, but not a female. Amar Rav Chisda. So now Rav Chisda taught, I'll call Modim, everybody will admit, Ba'almanas Isa shepsula kahuna. Everybody will admit that about an Almana Isa. Isa is a mixture. So that a widow who's a mixture is disqualified to marry a Kohen. What's an Almanas Isa? So Rashi says, Rashi says this is learned out in Ksuvos. It's a good review from Nashim. Ksuvos back in 14a. It says that Almana, who's married, a widow is married to an ambiguous halal, an uncertain halal. So there we're going to say, Rashi calls this a double doubt, even though it's not really the classic case of a double doubt, because there's only one doubt. We're not sure if her husband was a halal or not. If he would have been a halal, she would have been disqualified to marry to a Kohen. But we're not sure if he's a halal or not. So Rashi says, since she comes from him, it's called the double doubt. Tosfos says, no, it has to be a complete double doubt. But anyway, we'll go with Rashi's approach. But it says, everybody admits if you marry, if there's a widow, Almanas Isa, this widow who is perhaps married to a halal, we're not sure, that since it's a doubt about her, shepsula l'kahuna, she's not going to be able to marry a Kohen. And the Gemara continues, Man Meiko Bahani Tanai. So who is the one, and how does Rav Chisda prove it? Because who is the most lenient of all these Tanaim? Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, because Rabbi Shimon Gamliel is the most lenient of all these Tanaim, because he says, this is Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, so he says that also a convert from an Ammonite or Moabite does not disqualify the woman from marrying a Kohen. So Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, Kol shatanosa bito atanosa almanu. So if whoever you can marry his daughter, you can marry his widow. And whoever you can marry his daughter, you can't marry his widow. What's it coming to exclude? Who can you not marry the widow because you can't marry his daughter? The widow of an almanas Isa, that since it's the offspring of a cholal, because it's perhaps a cholal, so to the widow is also disqualified to the kahuna. And this position of Rav Chisda comes to exclude a different position. It says the Tanan Heid Rabbi Yeshua the Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira almanas Isa shekshir lakuna. But there is a position that says Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says that almanas Isa can marry Kohen. My time because it's a double doubt. The Shach was the one who came up with this concept, who systematically categorized these concepts of the Sfek Sveka. The Sfek Sveka, since it's a double doubt, it's too attenuated. Therefore, we could be lenient. So Rav Chisda's Tana is arguing with Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. So then we had said in our Mishnah that according to our Mishnah, Rabbi Eliezer says Vada and Bevada Mutter, that if it's a certain mamzer, he can marry a certain mamzer. But if it's a certain mamzer with a doubtful mamzer, then it's prohibited. And also, two doubtful mamzerim are also prohibited against each other because one of them might be a mamzer. So Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amarav, Halachak Rabbi Eliezer, the law is like Rabbi Eliezer who says that only a certain mamzer can marry another certain mamzer, but a doubtful mamzer cannot marry anyone. Ki Amrisa Kamei de Shmuel Amar Lei. So Shmuel, when Rabbi Eliezer position was said in front of Shmuel, he said, Amarli, Rabbi Yehuda was a student of Rav, and then after Rav passed away, he went to study with Shmuel. So he took Rav's teaching that that doubtful mamzer can never get married, and he took it to Shmuel, and he said to me, Hillel taught in our Mishnah that 10 groups of lineage of Yochsim went up from Babylon, and they could all marry, and they were all allowed to marry. They couldn't all marry each other, but they could all get married. And you say, Rabbi Eliezer, and you say that the law is like Rabbi Eliezer, that a doubtful mamzer can't get married. And so now we see that Rav is saying a doubtful mamzer can't get married, and Shmuel is saying they can get married. So the Gemara says, V'rami the Rav, V'rami the Shmuel. So we have a contradiction from another teaching of Rav and another teaching of Shmuel. Dinmar Arusa She'ibra, because let's say we have a woman who is a fiance. So fiance is not allowed to be with anyone at all. She can't even be with her husband. But if she's with her husband, that's just a prohibition. If she's with another man while she's engaged, that's adultery. So we say that, because we learned in the Brisa, we learned in the Memra, Arusa She'ebra, that if there was a woman who was betrothed and she became pregnant, Rav says the vlad is a mamzer. Rav says the offspring is a mamzer. And Shmuel says Havlat Shasuki. So Rav says the offspring is a mamzer, means it's a certain mamzer. And Shmuel says the offspring is a Shasuki, meaning it's an uncertain mamzer. It's a doubtful mamzer. Rav says the offspring is a mamzer of a mamzer, umutter b'mamzeres. Rav says the offspring is a mamzer, and therefore, since the offspring is a mamzer, the offspring can marry a mamzeres, which is the opposite of what Rav said before, because Rav is saying the offspring is a mamzer, umutter b'mamzeres, even though we don't know who the father is. So it's a case of uncertainty, and so this is the opposite of what Rav said before. Because before Rav said if it's an uncertain mamzer, you can't marry somebody, and here he's saying it can. Shmuel said Avlad Shasuki, and Shmuel says the offspring is the Shasuki, meaning an uncertain mamzer, but also from mamzeres, and it cannot marry mamzeres. Against the opposite, because here Shmuel is saying an uncertain mamzer cannot marry. So we have Rav contradicting himself and Shmuel contradicting himself. So Gemara says Epoch. We have to reverse positions. Rav says the offspring is a Shasuki from an Arusa, and therefore Rav Amar Avlad Shasuki and can't marry anybody. Shmuel says Avlad mamzer, and Shmuel says the offspring is a mamzer from the Arusa and can marry somebody. So if the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, Tarti Amalei, why would Rav and Shmuel need to repeat their memra twice? It's enough to say it once. Gemara says, Tzricha, we need to repeat it twice. Diyat Marbaha, if we only had the case of Diyat Marbaha, if we had the case only by the Shasuki of our Mishnah, that there Rav says she can't marry anybody, and Shmuel says that the offspring of the Shasuki can't marry anybody, and Shmuel says she can. And the Shmuel says the Shasuki can. Rav says Shasuki can't marry somebody. So why don't we need both cases? Because if we only had the case by the Shasuki of our Mishnah who came who comes from a free woman, there we would say Bahakam Rav. There in that case, Rav would say there in that Rav would say that Lachas Rebbe Lazar, who says that Sfeika can't marry a Vada Mishum Derov Ksher Metzah, because most of the people who are with her are Ksherim. And so therefore we follow after the majority and we say that offspring is kosher. And so therefore we say maybe this Shasuki can't marry Mamzeris. But in the case of the Arusa, the Rov Psuam Etzla, where most of the people who are with her are disqualified. Amar Modile Shmuel, maybe you'll agree with Shmuel that most likely the Shasuki, this offspring is a Mamzer, and therefore it will be allowed to be with a Mamzer. Be it Marbach, and if you only had the case of the Arusa, we would say Bahal Kamarav. There in the case of the Arusa, Rav would say that the offspring cannot marry a Mamzer Mishum Deiko Misla Ba'aros. There in that case, we would say that the Shasuki can't marry a Mamzeres, because we could say that this offspring comes from the Aros and kosher, and so therefore the offspring is not a Mamzer, and she can't marry another Mamzer or Baha. But in this case, from its Penuya, Shmuel, maybe to agree with Shmuel that it's a Mamzer, can marry another Mamzer. So therefore, we need in both cases Tricha. Or alternatively, you could keep the position and say Rav says the opposite and Shmuel says the opposite, based upon whether it's a Penuya or an Arusa. My Mamzer dekama Rav, and then when Rav says that the offspring of an Arusa, what does Rav say? And why does Rav saying that this offspring of the Arusa is a Mamzer? Rav mutter b'mamzeres. It doesn't mean he's not saying that she's allowed to marry Mamzeres. Ella, he's only saying the Asr b'bas Yisrael. He's saying that the offspring of this cannot marry a Bas Yisrael. He's not defining Mamzeres the same way. Shmuel says Avad Shasuki, and what Shmuel is saying is that the offspring of such a union of an Arusa is a Shasuki. He's saying the Asr b'bas Yisrael. That he's saying that this offspring cannot marry the daughter of an Israelite. Well, if that's the case, Shmuel's saying same thing as Rav. I know the Rav. So then Shmuel's not arguing with Rav. So it can't be that way. So the Gemara says, "Oh, my Shasuki." So no, what does it mean? Shmuel says that the offspring of an Arusa is called a Shasuki. Meaning to say, we don't allow him to be a Kohen. The Gemara says, "Well, Pshita, that's obvious. Hashta midin Yisrael." We just said he's not even allowed to marry into a Jewish person. For sure, he can't marry. He's not a Kohen. So what does Shmuel say when the offspring is a Shasuki? We don't allow him to inherit his father, to the Arus. Well, the Gemara says Pshita. Of course, we don't allow him to inherit. We don't know who the father is. Of course, he can't inherit it. The Gemara says, no, we're talking about a case, the toughest, where even though he grabbed a hold of the possessions and he says, I'm the father, we take it away from him. He buy the same alternatively. What does Shmuel mean when he says the Shasuki? By Shasuki, Beduke, he means he's not a Shasuki, but we check him. Shabotkinas imo, we ask the mother. Meres, and if she says Lakasher Navalti, if she says I was with a person who was my husband, now we believe her. Now menace. So Gemara says, well, why do we believe him? Why did Shmuel say we believe her under those circumstances? Come on, Rebbe Gamliel. Do you mean to say that Shmuel is saying like Rebbe Gamliel that we believe the woman and we ask her who she was with? Didn't Shmuel already tell us that one time? That Tanan Haisamu Beres said in the Mishnah if she was pregnant, that what's the nature of this baby? And if she claims it's from this man and he was good yichus, Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Menes, Rabbi Shua, Rabbi Menes, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Gamliel, and Shmuel says the law is like Rabbi Gamliel. So why would Shmuel need to say the same teaching twice? The Gemara says Tricha. No, we need to say it twice. If it's just the case by a penuya that we believe her, Avamina, Asam Rav Ksherim. So why do we believe her if she was single? Because most of the people she was with would be kosher. But here in the case of the Arusa, where most of the people she's with are disqualified, we might have said we don't believe her. So therefore we believe it in both cases. So therefore we need it in both cases. Tanya, we weren't in the Bryce. So Rabbi Eliezer Omer, we weren't in the Bryce that says Kusi lo yisa kusis, that a male Kusi cannot marry a Kusis. We learned in the Bryce that a male Kusi cannot marry a female Kusi. So the Gemara says why the Gemara wants to know why, according to Rabbi Elazar, the Kusim are prohibited to marry each other. So it says, Rabbi Elazar says that the Kusi cannot marry another Kusi. It's my time. And what's the reason why a male Kusi cannot marry a female Kusi? So Amar Rav Yosef Asu Kager Achar Asara Deoros, because we make this Kusi like a convert even after 10 generations. And so therefore, what's going to be the concern? That since after 10 generations, meaning to say they made this male Kusi like a convert in the 10th generation, that we forgot that he converted, and the sages therefore prohibited him to marry a mamzeres, even though a ger can marry a mamzer, and a ger marries a gioris for 10 generations, they can marry mamzeres, but the rabbi said that after 10 generations we forgot that they were a convert, and the sages prohibited them to marry a mamzeres, so we don't say that the Jew married somebody who is disqualified to. The Tanya, as we learned in the Brisa, a convert can marry 10 generations, can marry a mamzeres. After that, he can't marry a mamzeres. Some say he can marry mamzeres until he forgets his until he forgets the whole concept. We don't know that he was ever a convert. Abaye says the two cases are not the same at all. So Abaye says you can't compare the law of the Kuti and the Ger. Hasam there with respect to the Ger. The reason why they prohibited him, what we're talking about is the Ger Yashon. We're talking about a convert converted many years ago. And so therefore, someone who sees it doesn't recognize him. They'll think he's a Jew. Mamzeres Chadasha. And a new mamzer who they all recognize. And so therefore, they don't allow them to get married. Amri Bar Yisrael, the Kanas of mamzer. So think a regular Jew is marrying a mamzeres. But Hacha, in the case of the Kusi, Idi ve'idi ki adadi nenu. We'll say they're both Kusim. Why can't they marry each other? Since they're both at the same level, they can't marry each other. So therefore, the Gemara brings a different reason. Why can a Kusi not marry a female Kusi, according to Rabbi Eliezer? Avdimi, and whenever Avdimi comes, you remember from all Shas that Ravin is not far behind. So Avdimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel. He says, Amar Rabbi Eliezer, several like Rabbi Yishmael. He says, Rabbi Eliezer holds like Rabbi Yishmael, top of Ayin Hayim Abayz. Rabbi Yishmael, several like Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Yishmael holds like Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Eliezer, several like Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Eliezer holds like Rabbi Yishmael, who says, Kusim Gerei Arayosim. He holds that these Kusim, they're not real converts. They only converted because of the lions. The lions came, and this is in the book of Kings, and they didn't attack the Jews, so it was very unusual. So the Kusim converted. So we said these are not real converts, and so they're not really Jewish. Rabbi Yishmael says like Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yishmael holds like Rabbi Akiva. It says, "Oh, the Chavim ve'eved abal avad mamzer," and Rabbi Yishmael holds like Rabbi Akiva, says an idolater or a slave was with a Jewish girl, the offspring was a mamzer. And so therefore, since we have a question by every Kuti, maybe they come from a Jewish woman who married to a Kuti, and then it's a mamzer, or maybe they came from a Kuti and a Kuti and it's a guy, and it's a regular non-Jew, therefore they can't marry with each other, because maybe they're mamzer, and it's a Jew, and therefore they're not allowed to marry a non-Jew. So therefore, that's the reason why a Kuti cannot marry Kutis, according to Rabbi Eliezer. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Akiva. The Gemara goes on a little bit of a tangent. It says, do we really think that Rabbi Shmuel holds like Rabbi Akiva? How do you know that if an idolater or a slave who is with a daughter of a Kohen or a Leviah or a regular Jew, that they disqualify her? It says, Ubasko and Kitiel Mano Grusha Vizara Ein La. Daughter of a Kohen, if she'll be a widow or divorcee and she will have no seed, then the verse says that she goes back to her father's home and eats the truma. But we learn out from this pasuk, Misha Yeshel Almanas v'Gerushin. So where does this case apply? Meaning to say, it says this applies that she goes back to her father's home if she was with somebody who she could technically be married to. So Yato the but if she's with an idolater or a slave where it's not a marriage, so therefore we're going to say under those circumstances this law will not apply, that she can't go back to her father's home. And if you want to say Rabbi Shmuel holds like Rabbi Akiva, he says, why would Rabbi Shmuel need to teach his teaching. She's a mamzer, of course. She's disqualified from eating the truma. Ela Rabbi Lazar, Sabalak, Rabbi Yishmael. So therefore, we have to say it's differently. So Rabbi Lazar, who says that a kuti cannot marry a kutis, it's because he holds like Rabbi Yishmael, who says kusim geri arayos. He says these kusim are not really Jews. But several Rabbi Akiva to over evet abal basrav mamzer. So the Gemara says we have to say that Rabbi Eliezer is the one who holds like Rabbi Shmuel, and Rabbi Eliezer is the one who holds like Rabbi Akiva, who says the offspring is a mamzer. And so, therefore, we're not sure if it's a mamzer or a Jew, mamzer or a non-Jew, and therefore you cannot marry. Kusi cannot marry kusis. So the Gemara says, but wait, how do we know that Rabbi Elazar holds like Rabbi Akiva? Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Elazar, even though Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel argue about the co-wives of a woman. Whether that Beit Shammai says that you can do yibum with the co-wife of a woman who you know how to marry, and Beit Hillel says that you can't. Modin, they both agree. They don't agree with Rebbe Kiva that every prohibition makes a mamzer. They say only if it's erva and kares. Ella, so therefore we need to know why does Rebbe Elazar say a kusi cannot marry kusis? Okay, Asa Ravin, Amar Rebbe Chibar Abba, Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Rebbe Bar Zada, Amar Rebbe Chanina, Amar Allah, Amar Rabbi Yaakov Bar Yidi, Amar Rebbe Shimon Levi. Shalosh Machlokos B'Davar. There are three positions with respect to the kusim and the kohanim that became mixed together, and so as a result of that, we're going to see why the kusim are prohibited to come into the community. Rabbi Shmuel says kusim geri arayos, and Rabbi Shmuel says a kusi cannot marry into the community because he says they're not really Jewish. They converted under false pretenses, and also kohanim shenit mubahem. And so too, the kohanim got mixed in them. Kohanim psul, they're disqualified from the kahuna, as it says. That it says that they made from the best kohanim bamos. From the mean to say that who did they take out from the disqualified ones amongst them, and so they put these disqualified kohanim, and since they were good converts, they disqualified. Whereas, so that's Rabbi Shmuel's position that the kusim were not actual converts. Rabbi Kiva savar kusim geri MSA. Rabbi Kiva says the kusim are good converts. They're like the Jews. The kohanim shenit muban, kohanim kshirahayu, and so therefore there was a kohen got mixed up with them. They're a valid kohen, as it says vayasu mikzosim kohane bamos. Amar Rabbi Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, min abachirim shabam, from the best ones amongst the people. So why do the sages say that the kusim can't marry in? Because they only did yibum with the women who were betrothed. They didn't do proper yibum, upodremes and nesuos. And the kusim had a special ruling that if a woman was married, then they said they don't even need yibum or chalutza, because they had a special drasha. They said they learned that from the pasuk that this wife of this of the dead woman cannot be with an ishtar. They said that only applies to a woman who was outside, i.e. a fiance. But the one who didn't sit outside, she can be with an ishtar, meaning to say that the married women don't need yibum or chalitza. And Rabbi Akiva said, and Rabbi Akiva says that therefore their offspring are mamzerim, and therefore you can't marry a kusis. And some say what's the reason why that Rabbi Elazar's position is? The third position is that it's because the kusim are not experts in the mitzvahs. We'll have to stop here. God willing, we'll pick this up on Shabbos stuff, but we're getting to the question: are the kusim geri arayos or geri emes? Are they converts because of lions, or converts or true converts? Rabbi Shmuel says geri arayos. Rabbi Akiva says geri emes, and we'll have to have a further discussion. Yashar koach to everyone, and